how you going? Welcome to the next video in my Mountain Gold Australia series. I've been invited to a property in New South Wales to inspect an old mine up in the hills which has been in the family for 3 generations. In this part of the world we are virtually on the Great Divide, within around about 10 kilometres of the actual dividing line, and being on the Great Divide there is always a possibility of finding gold in this type of country. In this particular instance, on top of that hill, the family who owns this property found an old riverbed which contained gold right on top of the hill. To find gold up there, the old boys would have had to literally follow it up the hill from this creek and find where it was coming from. So that in itself was a major feat. And the story goes, the bloke who owns this property, his great-grandfather, found a piece of gold stuck in the hoof of one of his horses. As the old boys did in those days, they traced it right up to the top of this hill. And we're going to go up and have a look at it. And essentially what they did is they cut into the side of the hill and they pulled out the old river wash. Then they transported it all the way down, and that's where they washed it. Back in those days, it was all done by horse and cart. Apparently they had a funicular railway, and right here is one of the old mining carts that they used for their little railway line. Now for them to do that amount of work, they must have been getting something. We're going to go and find out. We're going to go and have a look at it. And it could be, in fact, that there's still some good colour up on top of that hill and even within the tailings that they left behind. So what we could be looking at here is, for want of a better term, a golden legacy which has been left to now the later generations of this family. Now this is not a known area, not a known goldfield, because it was only ever mined within the family, within the confines of this property. So it's not a publicly known goldfield as such. So our aim today is to find out what sort of colour they were getting on top of that hill. When we get up there, you'll see that they've left some big piles of tailings, and we're going to wash some of those tailings and see what comes out, and that'll give us a good indication of what they were getting. One of the characteristics of this type of country is we've got a bit of sandstone around, but we've got basalt caps. Right on top of that hill is a basalt cap, and it's under that basalt cap is where the old riverbed was. We're going to run some tests, do it through, and that'll give us an indication of the legacy that's been left behind. And now the younger generation has shown some interest in what was going on up on the top of that hill, and they've invited me to come and find out. So that's what we're going to do today. We've come all the way up through this gully. We're now on top of the hill. We're now going to move over to where the old boys got at the side of the hill. It's pretty unique. This is not a known area, this is not a known goldfield. This was a privately mined area by a family who has owned this property for about 170 years. The young fella who contacted me about this property, it was his great-grandfather who opened this area up, who found the gold here. As I move around to where the actual mine is, you can see the massive amount of work that was done here. The old boys traced the gold up from the creek, which is way over the other side of this hill. They traced it up to here, and they found an old riverbed here. They put a drive straight into the side of the hill here. So it was a lot of dirt that they moved. If you have a look at these rocks here though, these are all sandstone boulders. But down in here, they were getting into the river wash. I'm going to show you an example of the river wash that they were getting into, because they actually left a huge pile of tailings over there. And we're going to get to that soon. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. It's extremely waterworn gravel. It's old riverbed material. If it's like most old riverbed material, then it's highly likely that there was a very specific seam. But this is where they cut virtually straight into the side of the hill. So unfortunately it's all been blown in, you can't go in there. And what makes this place really interesting is this. I'm going to show you this. I'm going to walk up here. We've got a lot of sandstone, we've got a lot of quartz, we've got a lot of ironstones. You'll see now that the rock strata is changing, and essentially what we have here is a basalt cap. The drive went in just down in there. You'll see that there's another sink here, and if we keep following over the top of this basalt cap around about that direction, that's where it pops out on the other side. So what they've done is they've driven straight through the top of this hill, and on the way they've hit an awesome band of gravel which has contained gold. So essentially sandstone country, but on top of it we have a basalt cap. Underneath that cap we have an old riverbed, and that's where the old boys found the gold. Somewhere over in that direction, so the locals tell me, is an old volcano. And when you put two and two together, it kind of doesn't make sense how in sandstone country you've got sandstone is sedimentary rock, you've got old riverbed which is all sedimentary, then sitting on top of it you've got a basalt cap like this which is igneous. So it kind of doesn't make sense. But when I found out about the old volcano which is over that way, then it all fell into place. So it's very likely that over millennia we've had our sedimentary deposits, this being an old riverbed up here, and then later on further down the line we've had a volcanic eruption, and as a result it's all been capped off and trapped. So I've got to take my hat off to the old boys, how they even traced it. Now the creek is all the way down there in the valley, and they've come all the way up this hill and they've traced it all the way up to here. One thing's for sure though, they must have been getting something good for the amount of work that they did here, because over the other side is another huge tailings pile. They might have attempted to wash some of it up here, which would account for these tailings piles, and we're going to see if there's any colour in those tailings. Now, interestingly enough, further back over to the south side of this hill there's a massive trench, and it's quite possible, because there are springs coming off the top of this hillside, believe it or not, it's quite possible they use that as a water source, which would then account for the tailings over here. I'm right on top of the hill now, right where the apex of the basalt cap is, and I'm walking in the same line that the old boys cut straight under this little hill here. So behind me is the main mine entrance, and as I walk down here there's a few small sinkings, and this is where she popped out, down in here. Although it's fairly hard to see, right there towards the front of the camera is where the mine exited on this side of the hill. And over there is another very large pile of tailings. One of the best ways to find out what the old boys were finding is to go through their tailings. And if there's good colour in their tailings, then they were probably getting extremely good colour. The tailings, don't forget, is what they left behind. So now I'm walking back over the top of this little basalt cap, back towards the main mine entrance. If we go over to the left here, we'll find quite a deep pit right on top of this little saddle here. And here's the pit here. It's possible that the old boys sunk down into here to see if they could intersect more old riverbed over here. However, I think it's more likely that this is where they kept their water. Because if there's tailings this high up on the hill on both sides of the entrances of this mine, then obviously they had to process it, and I reckon this is where they had their water. Because believe it or not, as high as we are, we're about 1170 above sea level here. Even up here, there are springs coming out of the top of this mountain. I reckon this was a spring-fed reservoir which they put in place, and then from here they ran the water down to the entrance of the mine, which is where they processed some of their materials. Now we're moving back on the western face of this little hill, and if I go straight ahead, that's where the main mine entrance is. But apparently what they had here is they set up a little railway line, and the little railway line ran pretty well along the line of where I'm standing, around the hill and down all the way until it hit the flats down there. From there they transferred the materials to horse and dray, and right down near the creeks where they had their wet plant set up, and that's where they processed the materials. So one can only surmise that when they did have enough water up here, they were able to process it on site, and that being one of their tailings piles, the other being over the other side of the hill. When there wasn't enough water, that's when they ran it down the railway line, transferred it to horse and dray, and all the way down to the creek where they had a little bit of a wet plant set up. So they did it tough, these old boys. The one thing I do know is they wouldn't have done it if it wasn't worth it. So this is one of the tailings piles that has been left behind. They must have had some sort of processing plant up here at some stage. They were taking a lot of the material down and washing it there, but at some stage they must have been processing something up here. We're going to take some samples of these tailings. We're going to see what sort of colour was left behind. Essentially what we've been doing, we've been filling one of these sieves here up with a shovel load of dirt and sieving it off. Now this is what's being left behind, and there's still a lot of dirt left on it, so we're just dry sieving it for now. The reason why there's still a fair bit of material is because there's a lot of clay in here. Now this is what it looks like once we've sieved it off. A lot of real powdery stuff, a hell of a lot of clay. Now the reason I'm bringing that up is because there's a high clay content. That's a good thing, because gold sticks to clay. So what that means is, if there was good gold in here, if what they pulled out was rich, then there still should be good colour left in this dirt. So that's why it's worth putting these tailings through, simply because there's a presence of clay, and there's a stack of clay through this tailings pile, which means there should still be good colour in here. If there is good gold in these tailings, imagine what they were getting. Imagine what the good material was. This is the stuff they threw out. So by looking closely at what comes out of here, it'll give us a good indication of what they were getting out of that mine when it comes to the real rich pay dirt. This is fairly steep country, fairly hard to carry buckets. We've set up a little bit of a skip line, or a bucket line if you like, and I'll show you how that's going to work. So looking back down at our tailings pile down there, we've got this tree up here, and we've got some high tensile wire with a couple of pulleys on it, little four-wheel drive gator down there. So without any further ado, we're going to get into it. It'll be really interesting to see what sort of legacy has actually been left behind. We've got a bucket of dirt here, and we're going to test our little bucket line, a little skip line, and we're going to make sure that it's going to hold the weight. There you go, we're in business. Bit of Aussie ingenuity right there.
If you tie the rope in the middle of that, you can pull it down and then I can pull the hook back. Bloody beautiful.
Those buckets being 10 litre buckets pretty heavy, so anything that makes the job easier, it's all about economy for effort.
Send it.
Bloody ingenious. So after a few teething problems, a few modifications, the boys have now rigged up a continuous line. Saves a lot of walking because these buckets are pretty heavy. $40 buckets down to 1 bucket of concentrate. Now we did that in a little wet plant. Unfortunately didn't have time to show you that. So you've got to remember this is now 40 buckets down to 1 bucket. We're going to show you the good part now. We're going to run them through the sluice here. So it runs down a clean river sluice, an A pipe down to the little fella, effectively set up like a long tom. Those ripples are playing out beautifully. That's exactly what we want. If you look closely, you can start seeing colour coming up on the ripples there now. See this colour along here? That's all gold. All down through here. And that's how many scoops? 4 or 5 scoops? 4. Not bad. Yeah. So what, we're about halfway through the bucket. I don't know if you can see this, but there is just colour all through this black ribbon. Every single line has got multiple colours in it. We're only just about halfway through the bucket. Not bad, eh? We've done our one bucket of dirt, and if I can block the sun here, you'll be able to see, look at the colour in the top of the box. All that stuff in there is gold. And that's all visual before we even clean it out. So we're going to stop it now, and of course we'll do the clean out and show you the results. A lot of colour in there, all that stuff in there, it's all gold. 40 buckets, and we've got 1 pound of dirt, so we're going to find out exactly what we got. So I've got another pan under here, and we'll probably end up pounding this about 4 or 5 times anyway, because it's fairly concentrated material. But from what we saw ahead of the sluice, even before we cleaned up, we should get a pretty good show of colour. Black sand in there. And yeah, there's a lot of colour coming out of the top of the pan now. A lot of black sand there though. So what I'll do is I'll see if I can bunch all that together and we'll get a better look at it. So that's the result of 40 buckets, reduced down to 1 bucket after going through the wet plant, down to 1 cup after going through the sluice. And remembering that's what they left behind. So this is the stuff they threw away. So we're going to crunch a few numbers. We'll get back to you with that. That'll give us an indication of what they were actually chasing. That's not bad, is it, eh? It's pretty good.
It's good, isn't it?
Yeah, some nice colour. Especially considering this is what they threw out.
You still see it down below in the pan too.
Do you reckon that's about half an ounce?
No.
Oh, mate, my guess is you're looking at less than half a gram there. But I think we've achieved our goal. From this, we'll be able to crunch some numbers. Give us a fair idea of what they were actually getting into.